Okay. We want to be sure that the closed caption is on too. Captions. Oh, Miranda. Okay. Excuse me. Okay. I think we're ready here. Oh, I've got to start video. Woo! I guess you know that sentiment. All right, it looks like we're ready to start. Is that okay, Jackie? Do you think we are? Are the captions rolling as well?
Yes, it's rolling. We're ready to start.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm certainly glad to see everybody. I was trying to also post my column from today, which is about O.J. Simpson. But we're having some technical difficulties, so stay tuned for that when this is over. All right. Welcome to the Journal-isms Roundtable. My name is Richard Prince, and I write an online column called Journal-isms, that's journal-isms.com, on diversity issues in the news business. This roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999 when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. She said, keep these going, and we have. We met every month in various restaurants in Washington, D.C. until the COVID pandemic, when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and we hope to have more roundtables that are hybrid, meeting in person as well as having people attend via Zoom. We've had 3 or 4 of those so far. We think of this as an online dinner party with the purpose to network and to learn. Some of the networking takes place in the chat room, so please feel free to make use of it. A special welcome to those on Facebook and to those who will be watching later on YouTube. Please leave messages in the comments section if you want to reach us by Facebook. Our topic tonight is as how to counter the growing movement against diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and we have a stellar lineup of folks with us to help us through that. So, with no further ado, I want to start. I see that Mark Morial is here. Brother Mark there he is. Yes. President of the National Urban League. We want to ask our panelists to give us 3 minutes responses to the question at hand, which is what can we do about this, especially how should journalists respond to this trend? Because it's affecting all of us, even journalism companies. So, Brother Mark Morial, please take it away. Oh, you have to unmute.
Let me thank having me, and let me professional journalists, storytellers, and truth tellers who are on this Zoom tonight. How much I appreciate your work and your commitment in these difficult and challenging times. 3 minutes is tight, but let me try to begin this conversation this way. The root of DE&I is the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We once called what is now characterized as DEI, EEO, Equal Employment Opportunity. There was once a time when it was called Fair Employment Practices. There was a time when it was called affirmative action. And when the attacks on affirmative action began and intensified in the 80s and the 90s, the response was, we need a more inclusive term, a more palatable term to describe what is fundamentally equal economic opportunity. And so DE&I was invented. less offensive, less antagonistic. Now we see an effort to trash, smear, pejoratize the terminology diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's number one. The root, the Civil Rights Act, and each and every one of us and many others have benefited from post-1964 America in some way, shape, or form. Are we where we had hoped to be? No. Are we where we want to be? No. But has the nation changed since 1964? Absolutely. I'm a son of the South, born in segregation, born in a segregated hospital. I was 5, 6 years old when the Civil Rights Act passed. I have faint memories of signs and riding on the back of the bus. My parents were on the front lines of the civil rights movement. That's number one. Number two, this attack has been enabled by a Supreme Court decision that took place last summer that dealt narrowly with the admissions policies of 2 universities, Harvard and the University of North Carolina. And as many of us feared and predicted, there would be an effort to conflate, contort, torture, expand that ruling and its rationale to impact a wide range of forward-leaning racial justice policies in the country. Why did the Supreme Court and how could the Supreme Court do what it does? I like to always get back to root. The root of this Supreme Court is a 2016 election. The root of this Supreme Court are 3 justices who were put on there by the 45th President of the United States, who were installed because they would use their power to reverse jurisprudential victories that had been achieved in America since 1954. So this is a pitched battle where we're going to have to work on multiple fronts in the court of public opinion, in the courts, in state legislatures, in the streets, in boardrooms, in classrooms, across the line, because it is hooked to voter suppression. It is hooked to attacks on African American history. It is a wholesale assault on the last 70 years in this country. And we must understand it in that context and recognize this generational burden that now has been placed on our shoulders and our backs to do everything in our power to push back against this vicious, divisive, and negative assault. I offer no easy solutions, no quick fixes, no coherent 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strategy at this point. But what I do offer is a suggestion that we all must step up in the lanes in which we work at this time to push back on this assault, because it is indeed an assault. Now, here's the truth. Last point I'll make. DE&I and the Civil Rights Act of '64 banned discrimination based on race, gender, religion, and national origin. The work to get that change was the work of activism and litigation for decades. However, others who benefited from, quote, equal economic opportunity in DE&I have been too quiet. Our friends in other communities of color, our friends, who are at the front lines of the women's movement. They've got to be recognized that this attack, while the point is on Black people, the broad attack is on inclusionary policies of the last 70 years. So this is where we are, and this is an important discussion. Journalists, you always have power to tell the truth, to write stories, to help people understand, to debunk the myths, to challenge the falsities and the falsehoods. Long, powerful tradition. Use your, keyboard and your pen and your power and your brain and your creativity. We all got to do what we have to do.
Here, here. Okay. All right. I know you have to leave.
I've got some time. I've got about maybe 20, 25 more minutes. So I'd love to stay and listen to the discussion. And
excellent.
No, I
think there may be some questions for you from
I'll be happy
our attendees. Okay. Who's got a question? Oh my goodness. All right. Well, you've said it all, but yeah, go ahead, Cynthia Robbins.
Hey, Cynthia. Hi.
Hey, Mark. I'd like you to talk a little bit, you touched on it in your opening remarks, but about voter suppression and what's happening and how that connects to the DEI concerns. Particularly, I imagine you're mindful of what happened in the Eighth Circuit, but the fact that the last teeth of the Voting Rights Act have been gutted in one jurisdiction and there's a threat of others.
Thank you, because it's an excellent question. So beginning in 2013, the Supreme Court launched its assault on the Voting Rights Act. Now, by the time 2013 had come around, the Voting Rights Act was 48 years old and had worked in a very important way, one of the most successful civil rights laws in American history. The Supreme Court basically disabled Section 5, which required pre-approval of voting changes in southern states. If you read that decision, it is a decision of fantasy. The Supreme Court basically made these findings that there was no longer racial discrimination in voting. They ignored congressional testimony. They said, oh, Obama got elected, must mean bam, all of this stuff is over. It was an intellectually dishonest decision. Intellectually bankrupt decision. But what did it do? Before the ink was dry, state after state, every legislature in the southern states began to pass a myriad of laws to intentionally gerrymander, purge, make it more difficult to vote, an assault on Black people, disabled Americans, Americans of color, younger Americans, an assault on their access to the ballot box. Now, there was a report that just came out that says that the differential in turnout between Black and white voters has increased over time, the last 10 years, since this voter suppression movement began. Is voter suppression working? It appears to be working for those that want to stop us from voting in large numbers. This is absolutely the case. Then, in the aftermath of and this is a constant thing. So usually when you get a GOP administration, their Justice Department doesn't enforce the Voting Rights Act. They bring no cases, they process no complaints. So in the Trump years, you had really little enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. And the Department of Justice's enforcement powers are an important part of the Voting Rights Act. And now you have the decision that Cynthia just referenced, which says, hey, only the Justice Department can enforce the Voting Rights Act, not private parties, through a private right of action. So in other words, saying you can't bring a lawsuit. You got to let the Justice Department bring a lawsuit, which completely means whoever's in charge of the Justice Department has complete and unfettered control over the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act, which was never the intent of the drafters of the Voting Rights Act in 1965.
Mark, let me interrupt you for just a second. Let's get back closer to the issue at hand, and that is the attack on DEI. Now, you and your business partners have written letters to the Fortune 500 companies. You've banded together to do that. What has been accomplished so far?
So I would say there will be very soon a report coming from the Congressional Black Caucus, who sent a letter, which will report on the responses to that letter, which were an effort to secure transparency from major corporations around whether they were committed to DE&I. Now, what I hear is those who tell me, one company's leadership told me this yesterday, we're absolutely committed. We're not going to change anything. We're going to continue to go forward. That's a good news story. Then you hear, we're going to remain committed, but we're going to keep our head down. We're not going to say anything publicly. We don't want to be, incite any opposition. That's number two. Then the third is we've gone dark. We haven't responded, and many did not respond to our letters. There are those that did not respond to the Congressional Black Caucus's letters, and we're going to have to, expose them to public scrutiny, and the CBC is working on doing that right now because we joined with them. Many of us did, feeling that their power was important in this moment. So I think it is a mixed bag from those companies that are saying, I remain committed, I'm going to continue to do this work, to those who are saying, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to keep my head low, to those who are not saying anything, to those who are retrenching. Canceling the DE&I offices, firing the employees, removing references from their corporate speak. So I say this, the last thing I say, biggest thing we seek with these letters is transparency. I would say right now I feel disadvantaged in not knowing clearly where people stand. If they don't tell you where they stand, you have to discern where they stand. And so we hope with the report being prepared by CBC, it's going to help the community at large a better sense of where we are. We are pushing back. Any conversation we are in, we are asking people to remain committed. We are encouraging them to remain committed. We are making arguments about fairness, arguments about business, a combination of arguments to try to encourage people to stand up. But what we have on our side, and I point this to your attention, one of our partner ally organizations, the Black Economic Alliance, a relatively new organization, did do some polling, Harris poll, and it showed, significant majority, 65% of people in the country across the board generally support what we are talking about here, which is DE&I.
Okay. Lynn Adrian has a question, but first I want to ask, are you going to call out those companies that didn't respond or are retrenching?
I think we are. I think we're going to release a report that's going to include names. I think that is the plan to do that so that the community will know. And I think particularly will know about those that have not responded at all.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. All right, Lynn Adrian.
I appreciate so much or your connecting the dots historically about where we are. And I have been thinking about the idea that the larger journalistic community of people of color is that perhaps one of the things that we need to do is reclaim, take back our time with the idea of stay woke. Because it's not just what your organizations, specific organizations can do. I'm thinking about what we can do overall. You're talking about so many different things that are happening that are disenfranchising people, from DEI to voter suppression, et cetera. We need to stay woke and then it's express that to our larger communities wherever we're connected. I don't know if that sounds naive or whatever, but there are times when other forces have tried to neutralize certain phrases, like Brandon, like, okay, Brandon, etc., and it turned around to be a positive for the Biden campaign. So we need to just take back woke, because it doesn't have any meaning for the people who are trying to use it as a negative anyway. They can't even define it. Let's go back to what it was for us, for our communities, and use it to create greater awareness of all the different things that are happening and what you have to look out for. I don't know any other phrase that works otherwise. I'm frustrated about that, but I know that in the larger conversation, we all have voices and we can talk to people to say, like, look what's happening.
It's a great point. Most people may not know the historical roots of the concept "stay woke," which goes back to Black parents in the South encouraging their kids to be aware of the Klan and aware of lynchers when they go out. That's the historical meaning of the term, stay woke. And I don't think we should run away. You see, I really feel in this moment, we talk about a lot of things. We have intelligence. We have knowledge. We have know-how. We have data. Only question is whether we have courage to fight intelligently, consistently, and unapologetically for what is right. I tell people this is what is right. This is correct. This is not, there is a right and wrong dimension to these kinds of things, whether we're going to have an inclusionary America, whether we're going to have a multiracial America, whether we're going to have a just America where everyone has an opportunity to have access to the American dream. I mean, we gotta promote the notion that this is necessary for the future of the country in a competitive economic climate. And we have to do it consistently and not be afraid to voice it. One of the things I have found that I think can be very effective for those of you who is to tell personal stories. Personal stories of your own life. Like I'm not the kind of person that I decided that I would start talking about the instance in the last 5 years when I've been racially profiled. Right? Racially profiled, wearing an expensive suit in the lobby of a fancy hotel, getting racially profiled. I've never told this because it helps people to, there are many personal stories, maybe a personal story from childhood. We have to tell stories so that people understand this is not conceptual. This is not some conceptual, intellectual conversation. These are things that affect people on a day-to-day basis. It affects their ability to be promoted, to find employment, their ability to find capital for their businesses and contracts for their businesses. There's a dimension of this which is how it manifests itself. It manifests itself in many ways, and we have to tell these stories as much as we can. We have to begin to think about ways, because I just feel that we cannot be psyched out. The right wing that's animating this, they make a lot of noise, they have a lot of power, and they have a lot of money. What they do not have is the broad sentiment of the American people on their side. What they will have is a lot more power in the face of silence. Right? They want silence. They want people to back off, be intimidated. Right? Be intimidated. Don't say anything. Don't flame it up. You're being divisive. Well, I don't know if you're using I don't know if you're using the term correctly. If I stand up for something that is, correct and factual, that's not being divisive. You're using the term out of incorrectly. So I really think in this moment, we all have to, this is an evolutionary conversation about how we push back and fight back, but I also think we have to embrace a North Star, and a North Star is a just nation, an inclusionary nation, a nation where everyone has access to the American dream. I think about that a lot. And the other thing I think about, and many of you may be parents and grandparents, I'm both, with, children who are everything from Gen Zs to millennials. What I feel like my obligation is to them, right? To ensure that doors are going to be open, and they're going to be open wider in the future for them. And that this is not just about, our lives, and because you can fall and say, well, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm good, I'm finished, or I'm done, or I got my I'm comfortable. No, we have to think about it also in those terms, because that's why we are here today, because there was a generation that sacrificed mightily. We know that history. That history is injected into us. I mean, you all who are journalists, know of the founding of NABJ. I mean, my wife is a journalist. I mean, we talk about this all the time, and their pioneering work to open doors to newsrooms and broadcast studios and the like, or the founding of groups like the National Minority Supplier Development Council that Ying leads, to open the doors to business opportunities, and what it took for these folks to imagine an organization when they didn't have any money and they just had an idea and a sense of right. Or I think of 1910 when NUL was founded, or 1909 when NAACP was founded. I'm thinking, what were these people thinking at the time? They didn't have a big strategic plan, a whole bunch of money on office. They just had a sense of that they had to organize to fight back, and they had to organize to deal with some very oppressive conditions that existed at those times. And so we got to step up in this moment, organizationally, individually. We have to step up politically. Business people who have, even people who may feel that they're personally comfortable, need to be uncomfortable. This is that moment, and it is that moment particularly because you have a Supreme Court that literally has the power to wipe us out. If they are declaring civil rights acts unconstitutional.
Mark, if I could say, isn't that the point? Isn't that why? Isn't that why they're doing this? Because they think there's been too much progress?
Yes.
And they want to wipe that out. But let me move on to some of the questions in the chat. Here's one from who is with the American Institute. DEI may have.
Richard, we can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Okay. DEI may have roots in employment, but especially on college campuses and in journalism, issues are related to issues of recruitment, retention, mental health, community engagement, and protection against harm. Is the emphasis on employment hindering a larger discussion on the modern purpose of DEI? Would re-education on modern purpose have any impact on messaging and perception? And then there's another one from Betty Ann Williams, who would like to know your take on the polls that say African-American men, in particular, will vote for Trump in significant numbers. And let's be brief if we can.
Yeah, I don't think you can ignore polling in March or April, but I don't think polling in March, or if polling in March and April controlled it, there would be no President Obama, no President Clinton. There wouldn't have been a President Trump if one had looked at, but they are warning signs about what is going on. And I think more of it reflects in some Black men disaffection with the system, more than some love for any candidate. Lack of confidence that the system can in fact produce a better way and a better life. And people have to pay attention to that. It's a very real feeling. I think number two, as to redefining DE&I, I think, yes, always we need to make sure what it means from a contemporary standpoint. When you break it down, though, the linchpin of economic opportunity is work and wealth. Work and wealth. And education is a pathway to work and a pathway to wealth. And so it is so important to always recognize that the most important measure is employment and promotions and retention and the other things that may drive that. Or on the opposite side, business opportunity, contracts and capital and those sorts of things. But yeah, I think we have to always reimagine, and I think it's fair to rethink the arguments. And I'm always open to people saying, okay, well, maybe we ought to think about it this way. Maybe we ought to talk about it that way. I don't think there's any sacrosanct perfect way to discuss it, because what the opponents have done is try to create the perception that it is a favoritism program for unqualified people. Period. And I say to people all the time, and I don't know how many of you all may be in the same boat that I'm in. I went to the best schools money could buy because of civil rights. And what civil rights did is get me in the door. Never took a test, never wrote a paper, never showed up at the honor ceremony, never took the bar exam, didn't do a damn thing except get me in the door. And then we had to perform on our own. So the best evidence of the success of DE&I are all of you and all of us who walked through doors and prospered and succeeded and achieved and accomplished. Don't give me this stuff about favoritism for less qualified people. Don't give me that. Because now, after 50 years, the evidence is completely opposite to that. And maybe the idea that's why there's opposition is certainly the case. But again, it's a fair point to say, maybe we have to think about it and define it differently, but we got to always remember the essence. It's access to the economy.
Hey, Mark, can I just ask Mark a question? It's Jeff Begay's former journalist, so I can speak more freely these days. Mark, how are you? It's good to see you.
Jeff?
You've always been a friend, and it's good to see Michelle still looking over your shoulder back there.
Yeah.
Tell her I said hi.
Yeah.
You bring up some good points, but for me, now that I've left journalism for now, and I'm in a position where I can speak more freely about what I experienced and what others in the media have experienced. Yeah, doors have been open, but once you get in those doors, they sort of try to forget about you unless you speak up. They don't protect you from the colleagues who feel like they've been slighted because I got a promotion over them. They think it's because of the color of my skin and not the 30 years in journalism that I had. They start leaking to the New York Post stories about woke CBS, naming me and Nicole Killian. So, our struggles still continue.
Yes.
And when you talk about what's going to work, in my personal life, I will not watch programs that don't have diversity. I will not buy products from people who run companies and then tweet out racist statements.
Amen.
I think we as Black journalists, but also Black citizens of this country, let's do what Randall Robinson did. Bless his heart, and may he rest in peace. Things don't change in this country until they get hit in the pocketbook. That's the only way things change. And what I don't see right now in this country Is anybody speaking out forcefully enough in economic terms
Mhm.
to stop this rollback of DEI policies? 10
Mhm.
years ago or 11 years ago when I was hired, there were pressures on these companies to hire people of color. 4 years almost after George Floyd, you'll recall in the months and weeks after George Floyd, there was pressure for them to hire people of color. Now the pressure's off. And so what are they doing? Well, you can look on your television screen, you can listen to the radio. There's no pressure on them to do anything anymore, and they're not going to do it. And if you look at the history of this country, look at the lessons of Reconstruction. Every time there's this step forward, there is this backlash. And that's what this is. I do not personally think, I think the right has hijacked the word woke. I think anyone who is concerned about diversity, let's move away from that word and just start making it clear to people, we will not buy your cars, we will not purchase your products if your DEI policies don't stay intact.
All right.
That's
Thank
the
you.
only way.
Jeff. No.
Yes.
All right. Dr. Dashiel had her hand up for a while, and Patrice Willoughby of the NAACP also. They are both speakers, they're panelists, so let's hear from them. Dr. Dashiel first.
Okay.
She is of Ohio. She is the professor and director of the Scripps School of Journalism at Ohio University.
Yes, greetings from Athens, Ohio. I've been a faculty member in the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism for 32 years. I've been director of the program for the last 4 years. So I've been at Ohio University long enough to watch the university reinvent the wheel about diversity 4 times. And Ohio University is not Ohio State. We're not in Columbus. We're in a little bitty town in Athens, which is about an hour and a half south of Columbus and 45 minutes from the West Virginia border. You do not drive through Athens, Ohio on your way to go anywhere. You have to want to come to Athens, Ohio. And so when we're recruiting, Ohio University is a predominantly white university. And so in order to attract diversity and to get African-American students, other students of color to come to Athens, because if you grew up in Cleveland, Athens is a culture shock. So for years, we've had diversity scholarships in place in order to recruit African-American students, other students of color. And it's worked for the most part. I mean, we're still in single digits in terms of diversity numbers, but we're making progress. Well, because of this U.S. Supreme Court decision that you've already talked about, the Ohio Attorney General has decided that even though the U.S. Supreme Court decision focused on race-based admissions, that it should also include diversity scholarships because they are discriminating against our white students. What's frustrating me is there was this quiet directive, nothing written down, nothing was made public. It was just like whispered to us that we're not going to be allowed to offer these scholarships. Now, this is university-wide, but just in the School of Journalism, we had 12 diversity scholarships that totaled about $46,000 that we are not being allowed to offer for the next academic year because the Attorney General of Ohio ruled that we would be violating the terms of the U.S. Supreme Court decision and that these are discriminatory against white students. I spoke out. I was the whistleblower because everything was trying to be done quietly, underground. But what's frustrating is I've been met with this silence that was referred to with businesses who secretly still support diversity, but they want to do it quietly and they don't want to speak out. Or they basically just gone dark. The university's official response is to say nothing. in response to this. My argument was, well, you're violating the mission statement. I mean, if you go, unless they've deleted it in the last 2 minutes, Ohio University has a very strong mission statement outlining its commitment to diversity, inclusion, and equity. And we need to, quote, have these hard conversations, end quote. But when the Ohio Attorney General said, no, you can't offer these scholarships next year and even remove them from our list, nobody's saying anything. Nobody wants to speak out. I'm persona non grata. There are people who I could talk to on a regular basis and ask questions on a regular basis. They are uncomfortable being seen in public with me when I'm on campus. And so I guess my question of what the need is how do you fight an institution who chooses to ignore diversity, even though they say they embrace it? Because we have students who aren't going to get scholarships next year because of the misinterpretation of this U.S. Supreme Court decision. And it's clearly political. It's clearly political because we know the Ohio Attorney General wants to, the rumor is he wants to run for governor, and he's using this as a way to get rid of DEI programs at our institution. So this year's diversity scholarships, next year, will it be the programs the university offers to do diversity hires? I mean, that's how I got my job. I didn't know anything about Athens, Ohio. And so I was teaching at a different institution, but the opportunity was there because of, then they called it, diversity. Well, no, they called it affirmative action programs, hiring decisions. And those programs are still on the books, but it looks like they're pushing back so much in Ohio, and there are no laws in place to do that. And I talk with colleagues at other universities, and they're dismantling their DEI programs. So it's not just businesses, it's happening at the universities as well. And I'm over here by my colleagues in the School of Journalism speak out, but all the other programs or administrators or faculty members who could, they don't. They just want to keep quiet because they don't want to get caught. They don't want to be called out. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to be ostracized.
What's your advice, Brother Mark?
I want to give you guys a fact point, so we track, like many of you, the monthly unemployment numbers. Last month, we saw something, and I get great assistance from an African-American economist by the name of Dr. Bernard Anderson, who is now retired, but was the first Black tenured professor at the Wharton School. We saw something last month we hadn't seen. The unemployment rate went down for all groups, but increased for Blacks by a whole percentage point. Typically, what you would see is the unemployment rate going down for all racial groups, even if it went down faster for one versus the other, or whether there was a differential. And Bernie just sent me a note about an hour ago because I asked him what he thought. And he said, that there's a high probability that that number is being driven by the attacks on DE&I. And I'm going to look at that number over a series of months if it continues to go in that direction, then clearly something else has happened. Look.
Wait, could you repeat that? What number is being driven by the attacks on DEI?
That the Black unemployment rate is going up.
Okay.
While the white, Latino, and Asian unemployment rates are going down. Just last month. What the trend historically is it goes down for all groups, even if it's higher for Blacks and Latinos than it is for whites, for example. But in this instance, it went down just for the last month, and the Black rate spiked upward by a percentage point.
All right, let me ask you this then. DEI affects more than just Black people. So why would Black people be more affected than other groups that benefit from DEI?
There may be some selectivity going on here. I don't know, you see. And I hesitate because we look at these unemployment numbers and they bounce a lot,
Yeah.
right? To draw any hard conclusion from just 1 month of numbers. But what the month of numbers does is it puts up a big yellow light, a big blinking yellow light. Hey, watch this next month and see if this trend continues or reverses. And to Professor Dashiel, it's disheartening that these scholarships are going away. And I think the question will be, if the scholarships are open to everyone and no Black people get the scholarships, then clearly what they're doing is discriminate. And so one of the things is that we spent is whether we're going to have to play some more aggressive offense with litigation of our own. Jeff, to your thought,
yeah,
there is a lot of conversation out there about using economic power. Black people tend to spend, the masses of Black folks tend to spend most of their money on items of necessity. So if you stop spending on items of necessity, you have to find another source for an item of necessity, right? Not a nicety. So it's hard to organize. This is truthful, right? Hard to organize us economically on a sustained basis. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult to be successful long term. But you are pointing out the fact that there are many, many folks. Look, I told my team, I said, I'm not angry, I'm indignant. Indignant means there's a purpose behind the way I feel, not just angry for the sake of being angry. I'm indignant to watch what is happening on our watch, and to watch it come in the aftermath of this awakening moment 4 years ago with George Floyd, and to see it happening, it's clearly, apropos to post-Reconstruction. It's apropos to what happened in the 1970s with, the Nixon, silent majority and the Southern strategy, and the Bakke case, and much of what we saw happening in the 1970s and the 1980s, the Reagan years. I mean, we have experienced these types of backlash. This one is far more pernicious, I believe, because here's the thing to keep in mind. The nation, the demographics of the country, and now I think the country last census was 58% white and 42% non-white. The country's demographics are rapidly changing. And so the marginalization becomes not the marginalization of minorities, it becomes the marginalization of majorities. And think about what that means.
Okay, now Patrice Willoughby has been very patient. She is Senior Vice President at the NAACP for Global Policy and Impact. So please take the floor for your 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be here with everyone. And, the environment that we're in today reminds me of what our forebears did in history during the civil rights movement, following the challenges to the rights of Black people to actually exist in the country. As you know, the NAACP views lived experience and community as the experts, and we view this issue through that lens as well. Because with community at the center, we know that we have the most to lose. And it's only going to be through collective action that we're going to be able to move our society forward. And that means a couple of things. One is we need to vote electorally, because in many of these states, there are supermajorities where representatives vote against the interests of not only Black people, but white people and everyone else, but people who are experiencing economic stress and who don't have access to the means to make themselves and their families successful. The other thing is that economically, we need to vote, and that is to vote with our pocketbooks. Those companies, and there's now many decades of data that reflect companies are more successful, more profitable, and entities are more effective when they have a variety of thought and input from a lot of different people. And so inclusion as a business strategy, as a social strategy, is really one that is going to make America more competitive and make the pie bigger. The opponents of DEI are really focused on a reductionist view of what this country is, where we know that its potential really lies in using the everyone. And so that means that where companies are not willing to stand behind their programs, because we also know of many that are very supportive of DEI but want to be quiet, well, here's the thing. We shouldn't patronize companies that are hiding because they are afraid of activists on their board or others that are anti-DEI. Inclusion is good for the country. It's good for business. And it is really a foundation of how this country was founded, with people weighing in and contributing and building this country, and should now have the opportunity to benefit from it. At the end of the day, for journalists, this is a discussion of the person, the entity that is able to define the discussion is also able to make the suggestions to fix and offer the solutions. And so when these anti-DEI initiatives are being pushed forward, the measures that you have to take need to push back, really call things out as they are. And from a community-centered approach, Black people and communities of color need to vote at the ballot box and vote with our pocketbooks.
Does that mean that the NAACP would support direct action against these companies that are implementing these anti-DEI policies?
The NAACP is considering every tool in the tool belt. We recently issued a letter to the NCAA concerning its anti-DEI policies. Now, we don't believe that any marginalized person should be the one that has to make the decision about how accepting a scholarship is going to impact their future economics. But we are the consumers of sports. We are the consumers of products and services, and we should vote with our pocketbook. And the NAACP, just as it issued a travel advisory against the state of Florida, we reserve the right to take action wherever and whenever it's going to be needed.
Now, the NCAA, that was about Florida, correct?
Correct.
All right. So it doesn't really apply to the rest of the country, just Florida. Am I correct about that?
It was about Florida because Florida, the Florida universities and Governor DeSantis issued their anti-DEI rules prohibiting, similarly to Professor Dashiel. I'm from Ohio, Professor, very familiar. It issued its anti-DEI requirements on the Florida universities. Okay,
very good.
But this applies, this is applicable across the country. But it's going to take collective action and not hand-wringing.
All right. John Watson has his hand up also from AU, American University.
Hi, my take is a little bit, well, no, it's a whole lot different. And to explain it, let me just give you some of my background. I was a newspaper reporter for 10 years, a city editor for 11. I have a law degree and a Ph.D., and I teach journalism and communication law at American University in Washington, D.C. All that leads up to me to suggest that we as journalists have to make a specific legal argument against the Supreme Court decision that doesn't focus on political, social, or economic issues. It has to focus on the professional mission of journalism. And we cannot fulfill that mission as a profession, whether Black, white, or any race or religion, unless we have a newsroom filled with and guided by a diverse population. The diverse perspectives are the best opportunities for us to tell the accurate truth and the whole truth. A newsroom filled with and led with people from diverse backgrounds and life experiences, they know what's important enough to make it on the general population agenda. That's what journalists do. We particularly have to be protective of that role and that component of diversity in fulfilling that role right now. We actually, in my personal professional opinion, we need to separate journalism from the political, social, economic thrust, even though that is extremely important overall. But for journalists, we need to focus on what the Supreme Court decision indicated might be the way out. If you recall the decision, several justices mentioned that this anti-diversity ruling would not apply to the military academies. And if you didn't understand that then, you should understand it now. The Supreme Court has said the government has a compelling interest in keeping diversity in the military academies. Well, one obvious one is you don't want a military where the lower level enlisted people are Black and brown and the elite officers are all white, from West Point, the military academy at Annapolis, the Air Force Academy. So the courts recognize we have a compelling government interest in some educational institutions to make sure they are diverse. Journalism absolutely falls into that category. And that's the argument we have to make, not only in courts, but in the University of Ohio Board of Trustees. We have a separate mission. We have a professional skill and mandate that requires us to make sure the people we put out there are diverse. So I just want to get that on the table, because to me, and probably because my law background, I think that is the first attack that I'd be willing to sign up for.
Very good, thank you, John. Now, Kathleen McElroy is back with us from Texas, and since we're talking about academia, I want to give her a chance to talk about all of this from her perspective there in Texas, at the University of Texas at Austin. Kathleen, speak to us.
Thank you very much, and I'm sorry about the computer problems, and I'm sorry I wasn't able to hear parts of this, so I certainly don't want to repeat anything that anyone has said. There has been a chilling effect in the state of Texas. People have lost their jobs at the University of Texas. People who had been moved from positions that were no longer DEI still found themselves out of a job. There are policies now that make it very difficult for student organizations to get the same sort of support from the school as they did before. And this is throughout the state. But one thing I would like all of you to think about, especially journalists, is that there is a chilling effect on professors, especially assistant professors or professors who don't have tenure or professors who are on annual contracts. So they may feel very strongly about things, but they are in precarious positions. I feel a chilling effect, even though I'm a tenured professor and I've gone through some stuff.
You should.
So realize that in theory, the DEI legislation in Texas only applies to certain things, but I suspect the next time the legislators meet, they may enforce it even more. So what's going on in the state of Texas is real. What's going on in higher education here is real. And as many of you have pointed out, this is under the idea of fairness. And you can consider that concept for what it's worth.
Lane, do you agree with any of the suggestions that have been made so far about how to counter this?
She didn't hear them.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Oh, you didn't hear me? Well, the suggestions that were made so far have been leveraging economic power is one thing. What else? Raising consciousness as journalists. And also one thing that Brother Mark Morial mentioned is getting other people who have benefited from DEI, besides Black people, to raise their voices because they haven't been heard from enough, he said.
You know, I don't mean to seem pessimistic. I don't mean to seem cynical. You know, as it is, the two largest universities in the state of Texas have some of the smallest African-American populations. You know, and would I encourage a woman of any color to attend a university in Texas? Maybe not. So the economic part of that in terms of higher education is sort of already has made it the backgrounds of the flagship universities, though we do have robust HBCUs. I spoke at one today, Texas Southern. Many people who have benefited from DEI probably don't want to say so because they don't feel the need to. And you can ask them, but the beauty of this country is that you shouldn't make them. And in terms of economic, you know, journalists have been talking about this. People wrote about the gutting of the Civil Rights Act when it was happening. I just think one issue is that so many people focus on presidential elections when so many decisions are made in midterm state elections. So that's just my comment. I mean, these are all great suggestions. I'm not poo-pooing them in any shape, form, or fashion. But yeah, I'll stop at that.
Okay. All right. Well, we have two people that Mark Morial brought with him who can talk about this economic piece. We have, let's see, don't want to get anything wrong here. We have Eboni Wimbush, who is the president and CEO of the Airport Minority Advisory Council. And well, let's just hear from her first, and then we can you know, move on from there.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this conversation. I've been taking a few notes, and you know, there's some words that continue to resonate, and it's around collective action. It's around leveraging our spending power. But I also think of your role in this and my role in this in terms of telling stories. And I don't think there is one way, but I do think telling stories of economic development and growth and how minorities and women really fuel our economies, fuel our communities. I think it's critical. My organization is called Airport Minority Advisory Council, and we are the only national nonprofit trade association that really is dedicated to the full participation of minorities and women in this space. In order for you to tell the story, you've got to understand the industry, and people think about airports, of course, because we're all traveling, but airports are so significant to our economies. They serve as hubs, not only for transportation services, they stimulate economic growth, they create job opportunities. They really, you know, contribute to the broader national economic economy. And so I want to give you for context, how airports help this country. $1.7 trillion of economic output happens through airports. It supports $11.5 million of 11.5 million jobs in the US. A critical part of this ecosystem and building this country has always been women and minorities, right? Supporting that growth, accelerating local development. Mark earlier talked about competitiveness. We know in order to compete, we need all of our communities, all of our businesses to participate in that. The top 5 busiest airports in this country are Atlanta, Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denver, LA, and Chicago. And when you think about those communities, 47% of people in Atlanta are Black. In Dallas, 25% are Hispanic, 23% Black. In Denver, 32% are Hispanic, 10% Black. LA, 48% Hispanic, 9% Black. Chicago, 29% Black, equal Hispanic. So those communities in which people live, they have to be a part of that economic opportunity. Through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, airports were given about $25 billion. And so they have to participate in that job creation. Another quick data point, McKinsey and Company, you know, we're always looking at data, and we do like to tell the economic story based on facts because unfortunately, there are a lot of people who they think it's a handout, right? Any part of any economic strategy is inclusion, right? There's data that demonstrates that. There's data that demonstrates from McKinsey that business performance correlates to diversity and inclusion. The US Secretary of Commerce, she said in a speech not too long ago that our competition with China is global, but the economic strategy begins at home. So if the economic strategy begins at home, then it must include removing systemic barriers from minorities and women, right? Who are part of that ecosystem of building this economy, accelerating local development, especially within airports, creating jobs. So for me, I believe the opportunity for each of you are to tell the stories. I'm here to educate, but we all must boldly defend. We have to advocate and really fight. So most of you have gone through Atlanta, Hartsfield, and I'll end with this story about Maynard Jackson. You guys know that Atlanta as a city has some of the most affluent Black business people, including the likes of Herman J. Russell. Well, it took people with courage, people who were persistent, people who had political savviness to help create that Mecca that it is. Maynard Jackson, through that airport in the first expansion of Atlanta Hartsfield, said he was going to slow down the development until those majority companies included more than 30% minority participation in those jobs of the airports for jobs and contracts. And that's exactly what happened. And today there's a legacy of companies that is born through the expansion of airports because, again, these companies hire within their communities, right? And these communities are majority, like have over 40% minority citizens in those countries. And so, again, it is not just the right thing to do. It is an economic imperative. We are a part of the fabric of these communities. We are a part of this economic development. If we are going to compete with the likes of China, all of our communities have to participate. And so, you know, I'd be happy to answer any questions, but at the end of the day, you know, it takes each of you, I would say, reaching into your communities and telling the stories of how these business people are really building the communities and how they're contributing to job growth and unemployment And so that's what I would offer to each of you.
Thank you. All right, we want to go to Ying McGuire as well, but let me ask this question, and that is, you and Mark and others have talked about how inclusion really helps the whole country, but isn't the reason, part of the reason why this is happening is that some people don't want inclusion. The demographics are shifting away from white males, and there are more people of color coming, and they feel frightened and threatened. And so therefore, all the arguments about how this would be good for the country might not work with them, because they say, I'm glad that this inclusion is coming to a halt, because it makes me feel that more powerful. Is there anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just answer it. I'll offer this. You know, we're not going to convince everybody. And that point of view is a point of view that is held by some. But that point of view is based on fear, masking hate, and is also narrow-minded. Atlanta, Houston, and Dallas would not be the powerful cities they are but for civil rights. Prior to 1960, there wasn't a single Fortune 500 company headquartered in any of those cities. Before 1960, there wasn't a single professional sports team in any of those cities. The narrow-minded may be fearful, but we have to appeal to those who may have a more enlightened self-interest, who reasonable arguments can prevail with, understanding that there are just those who are so entrenched, so closed-minded, and so hateful that they don't want to hear it. You're right. I try to, remind myself to not fall into a trap of all people thinking alike, that any one loud mouth speaks for everybody in these types of very, very difficult issues. And so that's what makes our work hard and challenging. But I just feel that, yeah, we're not going to win a lot of folks. Because some people we just never going to win. But that doesn't mean that there are not folks out there that we can, who have an enlightened self-interest. I had a senior executive within the last 6 months tell me, major company, says, man, he says, I shouldn't tell you this, but I'll tell you this anyway. He said, our growth in our sales since 2000 alone, he said our major product lines was being driven, 70% of the growth was being driven by Black and brown people. He said, and inside my company, people look at that and are like, woo, what's going on here? He says, we know that our bread is going to be buttered in the future because of the businesses that we're in by people of color. And so for some of us, this is basic economics. Now, that may be not be the case for every business in America, but I'll tell you, you look at demand for new homes being driven by Latinos, Asians, and Blacks in a significant way. So you're not, I tell the banks, you're discriminating in mortgage originations, you're going to cut your nose off to spite your face if that's the game you're going to play. So we have our work cut out for us, but we do have to, I think, give it our best to try to make the arguments. There's a tough love here that we have to engage in, is to talk tough, but also try to reach out and help people along this conversation because it's so necessary.
And if we don't, I'll just say it's moving from education to business. There are a number of court cases around the country. The person was in Texas from the University of Texas a few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago. In the state of Texas, a federal judge ruled that the MBDA, the Minority Business
Yeah, isn't
Development
it crazy?
Agency, right, they can no longer serve the community that they were designed to serve because they were sued by 3 white business owners, right? In the US DOT right now, there is a case in court in which, they are suing DOTs and challenging their DBE program. Not too long ago, there was a case against the Small Business Administration, and the Small Business Administration, they were sued, and they actually no longer can use what's called rebuttal presumption process to certify companies. And so now there's a whole new process. And so we think that this is just education. It is moving from education to the business environment and whatever is next. And so if we don't stand up, if we don't educate, if we don't tell the story, and we don't really push against this, who's to say what other aspects of our lives that this is going to continue to move against? And so, we can't be selfish, right? We've got to think about future generations and really stand up for this.
What is the DBE program that you mentioned?
Sure, the Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program.
Okay.
Okay, you're familiar. Thank you. Got it.
Thank you. All right, now Ying McGuire has also been very patient and sitting there listening to everybody else. She is the CEO and president of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, and she's among the business people who wrote the letter to the Fortune 500 companies and seeking transparency. So your 3 minutes, please. Glad to have you.
Well, thank you, Richard. That's before I fall into sleep. Just kidding. Hi, Mark. Following Mark is like being handed the mic after Beyonce performance. Like, talk about a tough act to follow, Mark. But thank you, Mark. On a serious note, being an inspiration to all of us and a really exceptional mentor to me, and thank you so much. I'm glad to join this online dinner party. Where's my meal, right?
You have to bring your own, unfortunately.
Okay, all right. Next time we order, DoorDash. So I lead the National Minority Supplier Development Council, short for NMSDC, as a CEO, and with over 2 decades history in tech industry, believe it or not, behind me. And I was an immigrant, arrived in US with just 1 suitcase and $1,000 and a dream. And now living in that dream and also empowering Black and brown businesses to do the same. Who among you is familiar with NMSDC? Anybody raise your hand? Very few. Mark knows this very well because we're partners, right, Mark? So real quick, let me share with you a little bit about what we do. NMSDC originated in 1972 following an executive order by President Nixon, it is Republican president, and aimed at promoting racial equity. The Eboni mentioned the Minority Business Development Agency was formed, and then we became an arm to work with the corporate America. So this initial government directive has since transformed into a member-based organization with the backing from about 1,700 corporate members we have. And we really dedicate to serving minority-owned businesses, including Asian Indian, Asia Pacific, Black, Hispanic, and Native American companies, and really integrate them into the corporate supply chain. And we certify and authenticate minority-owned businesses. We partner with our corporate members to develop them. There's acceleration programs here and there to make them corporate contract ready, and then connect them to corporate purchasing opportunities, relationship capital, educational resources. Yes, we're the matchmaker, and we advocate for them with corporate America and with government agencies. So we have been front and center working with our corporate partners to implement inclusive procurement practices, or you probably know supply diversity. Now we call it business diversity. Our economic impact has been pretty tremendous. Our last study we did last year reported about $316 billion annual revenue from NMSDC certified MBEs, MBE meaning minority owned businesses. And it's about $498 billion annual economic output and 1.8 million jobs. And the number seems pretty impressive, but you think about it, it's really little over 1% of our GDP, even though the communities we represent makes up around 40% of the population. And there's a huge amount of potential for MBEs to contribute to even greater share of the US economy. Both Mark and Eboni talk about the business value. It's really business imperative. Right now, the landscape today is promising but challenging at the same time. I like to look at the bottles half full. On the one hand, there's growing recognition of the value that minority-owned businesses bring to the economy and the supply chains of large corporations. Our board is made up largely chief procurement officers of Fortune 500 companies. And on the other hand, that this whole systemic barriers still exist, and all these issues we just talked about, court rulings against DEI practices, are making it very harder for these businesses from accessing the opportunities that they deserve. So to address this, we realize we really can't do it alone. This is a great dialogue. So we're leveraging coalition building and a partnership and networks to create and communicate a business case and national narrative on the importance of MB integration and inclusive procurement. And Mark has been the fearless leader on this coalition, and I'm so proud to be his student and his partner.
Yes.
and Richard, as you mentioned, most recently, the members of coalition, including Mark and I, sent an open letter to Fortune 500 company CEOs, really urging them to maintain their commitments and expand their supply diversity, business diversity initiative in the face of evidence that not only are these programs good for the economy, but that they are really still highly supported by corporate America. We released a survey conducted in December 2023 by Morning Consult, and it shows like 83% of senior executives across political affiliations said diversity initiatives play a very critical role in the success of their company. Jeff, you said earlier, we're not going to buy from the company who do not integrate our people, right? And so it's very evident that even 75% of self-described conservative executives said recognize the positive contribution of diversity initiative to their business performance. And what role do you all play? You play a huge role. Patrice and Eboni and Mark also all talking about, you have a powerful role in shaping public discourse through, fact-driven, data-driven, story-driven reporting and facilitate a really educational discourse. The educational awareness is very critical. And
you're talking about success stories, basically telling success stories.
Yeah, sometimes you have to tell the success stories. We have 17,000 certified MBEs, and each one of them have a great success story to tell how these programs help them to start a business, grow their business, put food on the table, not only in their family's table, but their employees' table. We're empowering job creators. And so those stories, we need to tell the data, we need to share, and I think Eboni mentioned some, and there's so much data out there. The Corporate Diversity Index said diverse businesses are 70% more likely to capture new market and 84% more likely to innovate products and services successfully. So there's data, and then there's success stories you can tell to link to this data. And really, the journalists can help create spaces where meaningful conversation can take place, moderate these dialogue, ensuring the discussions are balanced and fact-checked. In fact, 3 years ago, we launched a Minority Business Economic Forum. Mark spoke at our inaugural forum in Chicago. This year, we're gonna have it in Seattle in just about 4 weeks. So if any of you are nearby or in Seattle area, you're welcome to participate. We really try to create a space to have a conversation. Some of the dialogues we're gonna talk about is, AI and racial equity, and we're gonna talk about the future of diverse businesses, and we're gonna talk to corporate America in spite of all these backlashes. How can we grow minority businesses, especially in the space, in the future economy, like, transition to clean energy? What is minority business role in this? And, what is their role in the future AI space? And how can we integrate, how can minority businesses capture as much of opportunity as possible from this once in a generation federal government investments that's into the economy? So we're all having that discussion, and love to invite you all join us in Seattle as well.
Okay, well, we had a question from somebody. How will we be able to get copies of all this research and these announcements? Yeah, I guess you have a mechanism for getting all this information out to the public?
Yes, most information is on our website, Mark's website, and my email is ying.mcguire@nmsdc.org. I can put in chat. Is there a chat function?
Please do, yes.
And then feel free to reach out to me. And if you search nmsdc.org, you're gonna have communication contact for us, and he's very responsive. So I'm gonna put my email in the chat.
Thank you. Okay, well, Isaiah Poole had a question about LGBTQ plus people. But before we do that, let me ask Daryl Burnett to talk a little bit about what they're doing journalistically at the Chronicle of Higher Education to keep track of what's going on with these anti-DEI measures. So Daryl, tell us what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I don't know if I can possibly share my screen or not, but
well, Jackie Green,
you can. You can share.
Right, so hold on. So I'll just show our track here. So you have to call, obviously, this is a story that we cover.
We're getting feedback.
Oh, okay.
I think everyone just has to mute.
Okay. All right, what about now? It's better?
Yes.
All right, sounds good. All right, so obviously this is a huge story at the Chronicle. I mean, this is affecting a large swath of higher education. So for the last year, we've been tracking a lot of the legislation. We started this when we first noticed the model legislation that was created by Manhattan Institute that was basically signaling to legislatures that this was an issue they were going to take on. Prior to this job, I worked at Education Week, which is where CRT took off. And at Education Week, we started tracking that legislation. And it was just kind of surprising as to how both legislation spread across the country and then evolved over time as lawmakers were experimenting with how to actually implement and kind of tackle a lot of the equity issues in K-12. And I'm seeing some of the same trends in higher ed in the sense that this legislation originally kind of started with trying to tackle 4 separate issues in higher education. One is how we hire, how colleges hire based off of identity, diversity statements, which is in the application process, asking people to talk about how they're going to add to the diversity of colleges. And then also some of the other issues are diversity training, and then some of the things that we hear a lot about in the news, which is the hiring of diversity officers, a lot of whom have been let go in the last couple of years. So I would just really encourage folks to look at this tracker. You might have to register to get past our paywall, but we go into not only what has actually been passed, which is there are a lot of states in which this legislation is failing. And one of the things we're doing next week is we're going to start a new tracker to show how colleges are reacting to the politics of this. There are a lot of colleges who are actually preempting the legislatures and getting rid of DEI efforts before that. But not only are we seeing that, but these laws, if you read the legislation, so within this tracker, we actually include links to the bills and you can actually read the legislation. A lot of the legislation is very specific as to what you can and cannot do. There is legislation that's very loosely based that says, oh, you just can't do DEI, for example. But a lot of the legislation, some of the things we're noticing is that they will actually parse out what type of diversity training you can do, what you can say during diversity training, who you can and cannot hire, et cetera. So I just find fascinating a couple of things. The biggest thing being that colleges are actually required by federal laws to prevent discrimination and stop discrimination when they see it. And so I do think that there's going to be a lot of friction in the coming years between federal and state lawmakers and accreditors and colleges over how they address discrimination on campus. And I will also just kind of point out one of the things that I really do think that journalists can do is, one, be more specific with language, stop kind of adapting advocates' language. It allows for us to cut corners when talking about race and identity. And then the second thing is, I do think that—
What do you mean by that? What language should we not be using?
Oh, where do I start? Culture war. I would even actually say diversity, equity, and inclusion, because diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're 3 different things, and colleges address those 3 different things in very separate ways, depending on what campus you're on. They will address inclusion in a way that's very specific than ways to actually add to diversity. Culture was one that I just find fascinating because it in a sense denigrates what's actually happening. It avoids us from talking about real people and real things and real policies, just kind of, and then I would just encourage people to, put faces and names and scrutinize a lot of so we've been doing a lot of coverage too about a lot of what the DEI efforts look like on college campuses. And some of them are just not very effective. You have to remember, these are the same college campuses that, in 2014, 10 years ago, students were outraged with Mizzou for the ways that they were treating students of color. I mean, we've talked to students at University of Michigan, for example, that are actually pretty upset with their DEI offices for actually not being effective. It's a lot of smoke and mirrors in a sense of colleges trying to avoid actually addressing real issues of discrimination and disparities between students on campus by saying, oh, we have this DEI office, but what the DEI office is actually doing is either ineffective or it is, there's some offices are actually understaffed, underfunded.
Has the Chronicle written about all this?
Oh yeah, so I will encourage you to go to we have this Assault on DEI page here, which kind of collects a lot of our coverage, and we've written, I would say, a whole bunch of stories. I don't know if Audrey's still on the line here, but yeah, we've written a ton of stories about this. I mean, the other thing I was going to say too is I know that it can sometimes be difficult in newsrooms to get back to writing about racism and discrimination. And that's one of the other things I've seen, especially in the education field, in that because CRT and DEI has so dominated the debates of how we talk about education, we kind of get away from the actual disparities and the outcomes on college campuses and in public schools. So the more we can kind of get back to the basics of, discrimination is real, racism is real, these disparate outcomes are real, and reminding readers constantly about, what these institutions are actually doing at the end of the day, I think can actually be really effective to get people to recognize recognize what's happening in schools, to put it simply.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Daryl. We had another question from Isaiah. Actually, since you're right here, Isaiah, why don't you just tell us what your question was?
Yes. So my question was if we could address the people, particularly the folk who are on the front lines of this, could address the LGBTQ targeting that has been very much a part of these anti-DEI efforts, and talk about collaborations across race, gender, sexual orientation, etc., to push back against this.
All right, who wants to talk about that?
So I'll take that. So as a part of our coalition, Isaac, we have NGOCC, National Gay Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, in the coalition. And so they also face the discrimination. And so we're working with not only the Black Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, Native American Organization, AAPI, Marx Organization, many civil rights organization, and NAACP. We're also working with the other disadvantaged business organization as well. So there are about 20 of us that I call to represent 73% of our economy. We're really working together to ensure that we're coordinated. We have a national narrative that we are actually going to play our role and ensure that we're delivering the message to our stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's time for us to introduce the attendees, and I want to call on those who haven't said anything. So let's start with Hazel Trice-Edney.
Hello, I'm Hazel Trice-Edney, Editor-in-Chief of the NNPA News Service. Did I just say that? Editor-in-Chief of the Trice-Edney Newswire, former Editor-in-Chief of the NNPA News Service, and also President CEO of Trice-Edney Communications. I wanna add something.
Please do.
Richard, I think about the Adirond case, which brought the language to the table about the compelling interest and narrowly tailoring why it is that we need diversity. And I think that's where we as journalists are missing it. I teach multicultural media history at the Cathy Hughes School of Communications. And one of the things that my students were assigned to do just last week was to look at the Kerner Commission, report. And the Kerner Commission report specifically said what the media needs to do in dealing with why we need more Black people in the newsrooms and in dealing with Black issues throughout our neighborhoods. I don't think we paid, well, I know we didn't pay enough about that, enough attention to that report, because as soon as Johnson left, it just sort of got sent to the side. But let me just say this, just as Frederick Douglass said, agitate, we also need to educate, and educate. And we need not only tell those good stories of the compelling interest and what happens when we have diversity at the table, we need to start telling those stories about what happens when diversity falls away. What happens when jobs start leaving our homes, et cetera, and what happens to neighborhoods then. And the Black press, we've been doing that. So we've been trying for many years.
Thank you. Thank you, Hazel. Jackie Green, who's our producer for this broadcast. You want to say tell us who you are and have any observations?
Absolutely. Thank you, Richard. And thank all of the panelists participating and all of those who are listening in. I'm formerly of USA Today, and I think we have to reframe the conversation and own the narrative as far as journalists. This is something that NABJ had been dealing with for a long time, particularly with the ASNE, the American Society of Newspaper Editors, when they were doing a count and they never made their numbers. And it's about, fair, accurate, and balanced coverage of all communities. And if you were to use that as your mantra, how do you do that if you aren't inclusive? If you don't have people who understand the community to be able to report? It gets back to the Kerner Commission report. It's about being fair, being accurate, and having balanced coverage of all communities. And to do that, you need to have representation of all populations in the community.
Here. All right. Khan. I think we're getting feedback. All right.
Thank you so much thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this highly educating talk. I really enjoyed what some
Tell us
of
who you are first.
Okay. I go by the name Brother Khan, and simply put, I am a good troublemaker. But otherwise, I've been a journalist and an activist. I do some community work in the Washington, D.C. area called Anacostia. It's a very historic. Just now, my friend mentioned Frederick Douglass, one of my favorite American visionaries and statesmen. And Frederick Douglass was from Anacostia in the last 18 years of his life. So I'll just, before I forget to mention, in July, I'll be doing at the Anacostia Library the color of news, black and brown in newsrooms. So any of your other friends who are here at this moment, I will really appreciate the first Friday of July, 3 p.m. at the Anacostia Library. If you guys may please come, you guys are key intellectuals, I believe, not only journalists, but also intellectuals who hold the interest of the people close to your heart. I really appreciate what you are doing.
Thank you, Ahmad. Isaiah Poole, who has covered some of these roundtables for us, and for that you have our thanks. Just introduce yourself, please, Isaiah.
Just want to thank you for this wonderful discussion. I did pop into something in the chat that I think is important. One of the organizations I work with is called Samaritan Ministry of Greater Washington. It does a number of things to support people who are at crisis points in their lives, and they're trying to get housing or get jobs or just get back on their feet. But our DEI trainings are actually DEIB trainings. Belonging is the critical piece. And I've come to believe that without that extra element of belonging, DEI is incomplete. And so I just want to put that out there as something that we can contemplate, this element that each of us should belong.
Gotcha. Okay, we're going to move on. Anthony Wilson. We can't hear you. Unmute, please. Unmute.
There we go. Unmute.
All right.
Thank you, Richard. I'm Anthony Wilson. I'm a weekend anchor at the ABC affiliate in the Raleigh, North Carolina market. And as such, talking about the whole DEI controversy, I've observed because we check our social media, I think there's a lot of hostility and easily triggered anger from some people who apparently hear this kind of stuff all day long from alternate sources on the right. And these people, I think in general, can't deal with the idea of someone who's not white giving them orders or being in charge of things. And I think that's also fueling a lot of what we're talking about here with the pushback in the universities. Now, the question is, what can we do about it? Because obviously we are trying to communicate and be fair, but it is kind of frustrating, but it's also almost amusing. These people are so easily triggered. So this discussion has been fascinating for me and also very educational. And I really hope, especially those people who are involved in higher education, can stand their ground despite the obvious attempts from people who are in a position to change things for the worst. And we will continue to try to educate people and hope that people who are at least open-minded can hear what we're saying, push back against some of the nonsense that we are seeing these days with these anti-DEI folks.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. John Yearwood.
Hey, Richard, another great program. I'm John Yearwood. I'm the editorial director for diversity and culture at Politico. I'm a former NABJ board member and former chair of the International Press Institute in Vienna. At Politico, one of the things I'm in charge of is a suite of programs that are involved in helping to further diversify the newsroom, from our internship programs to our fellowship. And in fact, we're actively working now on the next class of our Political Journalism Institute fellows. We make no apologies that what we're trying to do with these programs is to make our newsroom look a lot more like America than it has before. One good news there is that we have just at Politico, Richard, hired a chief diversity officer. So we'll be doing a lot more, and look for us to be doing a lot more in this space in coming months and years.
Who is the new chief diversity officer?
I'm sorry?
Who is the new chief diversity officer?
Her name is Sonia Fernandez. She's from a major international company that that's been working on diversity. She's worked in every place from Europe, Australia, elsewhere, and now she's come to Politico.
All right.
So anyway, Richard, look for us to be doing a lot more in this space, and you know, I'm willing to listen to anyone who wants to talk about careers at Politico. Okay. Thank you.
Yannick Rice-Lamb, or should I say now, Dr. Yannick Rice-Lamb.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm a professor of journalism at Howard University. And as Richard mentioned, I received my doctorate in medical sociology last May. So I focus on environmental health as well as social inequality and health disparities. And worked in newspapers and magazines for many years. So I also wanted to mention that we're sponsoring a town hall and screening on Earth Day from noon to 2, Monday, April 22nd at Howard University in the School of Communications. I put the information in the chat, and I'll also send it to Richard with the names of the speakers and all of that. So the screening is a short documentary called Underwater Projects, focusing on Norfolk, Virginia. It's by Dream Hampton. So I hope you could come. It's also being live streamed, or you can join us in person, and there'll be pizza.
Yay. All right. Thank you, Yannick. Sharon Farmer, our photographer.
Yo. I'm good. Life goes on. I'm just glad that Donald Trump's gonna go to jail. I bet everybody $50. So if you want those ones that bet $50, don't have me show up at your door. Just make sure you just come bring the money back. Everybody know where I live. Thank you.
All right, Francisco Vera-Orta from IRE. The first person to let me know about DBI, having the B in there also. DEIB, or DBEI, sorry.
Alphabet stupid feels like, right? We're always learning. So thanks for the invite. It's always awesome to be amongst y'all. And I put in the chat some info. I just want to shout out IRE. I'm the DBI director there. But we've seen.
Now, does everybody know what IRE is?
Yeah.
I think some investigative reporters and editors. We're based at the University of Missouri formally, but we're all spread out throughout the country and Mexico and Puerto Rico. And so we're always looking to collaborate on DEI programming. And, you know, our membership now is about 33% POC, which is great. We have more work to do. And our executive director is Diana Fuentes, a woman of color. She's been leading us for about, almost 4 years now. And we are continuing our DEI focused symposium. It's been rebranded as Access Fest. I'm wearing the shirt today. And we're taking ideas. So please join us. It's much cheaper than coming to some of our conferences. It's all virtual, so you can join globally because we really want to help our international diversity. So so I'm the same, like in the sense that we've seen these cycles, and some of you who pioneered and broke barriers for people like me have seen those cycles too. And so, you know, I get encouraged by seeing all of us sticking around and talking to Gen Z, and they're like not going to stand for a lot of the regression of this. And I think we just keep moving forward. And I see, you know, it depends where you look, right? I still do see a lot of newsrooms contracting us to do this work. So you know, that's encouraging. So I think it just kind of depends kind of where they're at. But obviously, anytime there's a movement forward, there's always a backlash. So here we go again. But it's been great to be around y'all.
Thank you, Francisco. Marcia Davis is here.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Folks who I know and have known for a long time, and folks who are new to me. Congratulations, Yannick.
You got to identify
and
yourself.
Richard, I will. All right. I was just going to say hello to you, Richard, particularly. I am the NPR's race and identity editor. And I'm very happy to be here. And I thought the conversation so far has been really enlightening. Some interesting ideas, and many of you I hope to be in touch with, many of the panelists. Thank you very much for that. And I have to say that NPR has had its own episode about DEI. We just got there was a note, a story, an essay, however you want to describe it, that was written by a colleague attacking NPR for not having enough diverse voices. But it was a multi-layered discussion, and fortunately, the response was a good response from the editor-in-chief of NPR. So I won't spend more time on that, but it was very relevant to this discussion. So thank you for having me and having this discussion.
Thank you, Marcia. Greg Morris.
Hi, my name is Greg Morris. Teach journalism at Hunter College. Had a lot to say, so I put it in writing and threw it into the chat. I want to thank Richard for another great roundtable. Richard has also been a sort of a spirit for me for dealing with things that are going on in my professional life right now. And I get to see and meet new and exciting people. And so I think I've said enough. I'm wishing the best for everybody. And I'm looking for different ways to get into this fight to make things better for the next people coming behind me, especially my students. So thank you, Richard.
Right. Thank you, Greg. David Willer, the first timer. Unmute, please. Unmute.
I got you. I'm here. Good evening, everybody. Actually, I was on last month, and I'm
that's right. Sorry.
I'm back again for this conversation. I'll come at this from the standpoint of an elementary and secondary educator. And to Brother Khan, I think it's Amir Khan, I didn't quite catch the name, but I began my career in Anacostia teaching at Magogny Elementary. So hello to Anacostia and hello to Magogny. Come to you today from Beaumont, Texas. This is interesting to me, a fascinating conversation because it also impacts teaching and also impacts elementary and secondary education. When I talked last month, I said that I was putting together a magazine, a journal, literary and lifestyle magazine geared towards African-American males, teenage African-American males, to try to stop the downward decline of reading amongst teens as a whole, and particularly amongst Black teens. And these anti-DEI efforts required me to change what was initially going to be my distribution method of the magazine. Because we have a relatively decent number of Black superintendents and Black principals in the United States, that was initially where I was going to target to distribute the magazine. But now with this pushback about what kinds of stories can be told and how they can be told, I had to sort of rethink how I was going to distribute the magazine once it got finished, because now librarians and principals and superintendents, their jobs are being threatened for teaching about the true history of this country and the true history of minority people, and particularly African Americans in this country. So that's why I came in tonight. I learned a lot, as I always do, as I did last month. I appreciate you guys for having me on again. Hello to everybody, and thanks again for an enlightening conversation.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Leon Dash. Leon, where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay.
I'm right here. This has been a very inspiring roundtable for me, because we're facing hurdles that we
First,
face.
introduce yourself, then you can.
Oh, Leon Dash. I teach journalism at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So as I was saying,
yes,
this has been a very inspiring meeting for me. I've been reading a lot about the fight against, or the dismantling of, DEI. That happened in my department in journalism. In fact, we recently inserted in all of our syllabi a DEI statement, and we include the students in those discussions. But it looks like we as a group of people of color are facing another big hurdle. And I think we're ready for it, and probably pass it on to a younger generation. But I think we're ready for it. From this meeting tonight, I see that we are. Thank you. That's all for me.
All right. And Francisco says that Generation Z is ready for it, so that's more good news. All right, Latrell Crittenden has put some more stuff in the chat, so you can sure to look at that. But aside from that, tell us who you are and if you have any other comment to make.
Thank you so much, Richard, for this panel. My name is Latrell Crittenden. I'm the Director of Inclusion and Audience Growth with the American Press Institute. I've held that role for several years. Basically, I work with newsrooms on basically dealing with challenges related to DEI and engagement both internally and externally to their newsrooms. You can read more about a lot of my work that I've been doing there. And again, now I bring this up because it is my effort really is focused on dealing with issues inside of newsrooms comprehensively. And I think that my concern, and this is what I mentioned earlier, is that when we're talking about DEI in the press, it is extremely generic, and it allows individuals who are opposed to this work to basically confuse what DEI is, because people don't know what it is. So you can say, oh, it didn't earn it, or you can talk about CRT in the same way. It's the same language, because it's confusing to most people. So I think there needs to be much more clarity and detail as to all of the different components of DEI and what it actually does and does not do, as opposed to having this discussion that is always cooked into hiring, which is not in many cases what DEI does. And I also bring this experience because before I took this job, I actually was doing DEI work at university. So I'll just leave it at that. But again, thank you for this discussion.
Thank you, Luttrell. Appreciate that. Paolo Baptiste.
Excuse me for having my camera off. Richard, outstanding job as always. We want to thank you for pulling us all together. Colleagues, my name is Bala Baptiste. I'm a professor of mass communications at Miles College. That's near Birmingham. That's it.
Okay. Audrey June.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me at the roundtable. This is my first one. I really enjoyed the conversation. So yes, thanks, Daryl, for that invite. I am a data reporter at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and I am also one of the reporters that works with Daryl on our tracker. I've been working on it since the beginning. So it's been an eye-opening experience to see the coordinated attacks on higher education through the work we've been doing on the tracker. And I hope you all check it out, like you said.
Well, thanks for being here.
Thank
Good
you.
to have you as the first timer.
Thank you.
Eleanor Vega.
Hi, Richard. Thank you again for a terrific panel and gathering some really great minds. I am a former bureau chief with CBS News. As one of the first Latinas that was hired. And I was there for 14 years, total of 23 years with CBS. I'm now the chairwoman for the DEI committee for the Society of Professional Journalists. And I just want to say that it's really important that for journalists who have made it into positions of power, whether it be a manager or a reporter, it's really important to bring up the younger people and even sometimes even veterans so that they don't lose hope in their confidence. Because a lot of times what happens is that they don't know how to navigate the system. And all they're seeing are people that don't look like them. And, you know, I was very instrumental in making sure that I didn't wait for somebody to say, hey, can you work with this person or that person? I went ahead and seeked out people that were struggling. It's like they hire someone maybe through DEI, and then they're sort of left to drown. And it was really important to help them navigate the politics, to have them strategize so that they could stay in their job, be better at their job, and then also be promoted to be able to gain other opportunities. And when I came to the LA Bureau, it was like 95% Black, 95% white. And when I left, it was 90% diverse of everyone and every gender, every age. I mean, and that was a great satisfaction to me. So I'm just saying, you know, just be role models to the younger people and even some of the older people so that they don't give up hope, that they can still make a difference. Thanks, Richard.
Here, here. Thank you, Eleanor. Charles Ray, Ambassador Charles Ray. You there? There you
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I have trouble with my tech. Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me. I am a retired Foreign Service officer who spent 30 years in the State Department. I retired about 11 or 12 years ago now, and before my retirement, and since, I have been working very closely with the DEI efforts of the Department of State and the other foreign affairs agencies in much the same way you guys are doing, and that's recognizing that diversity is strengthening and getting that message across to the people who make the political decisions. I was part of the team that pushed to get a DEI, a diversity officer in the State Department, which we were lucky to be able to do, although we still have pushback from many in the political field. One of the things that I thought was very interesting that was brought up, and this was something that we discovered about 8 or 9 years ago, and that is diversity, equity, and inclusion is really not about hiring. It's about creating a sense of belonging, and that was an issue that we found in the foreign affairs community was really big. Agencies were hiring to diversity targets, And then they were losing these people almost immediately when they arrived and found that they really weren't welcome. And the other issue that I push, right now I teach 2 graduate courses at Arizona State University, one on Africa and one on the Indo-Pacific, is to get across to people as widely as possible that it's not just about jobs in this country, and it's really not completely just about how we as communities get along in the US, but it's how we're seen abroad, and our position in the world is severely impacted by how we implement inclusiveness for all of our citizens, and our credibility as a country is destroyed when we don't do something about these attacks on DEI.
Here. All right, that's good. We met Charles we had a separate roundtable last year about, I guess it was last year, about how U.S. ambassadors of color see the world and saw their role. And so that was very instructive. It's also on our Journal-isms Roundtable website if anybody wants to go back and look at that video or read about it. Now we have Tracy Powell, who was with us last month as well. Tracy.
Hello, and thank you, Richard, for letting me in, even though I came in late. I am the CEO and founder of the Pivot Fund. And I think this is a really, really fascinating conversation, especially in terms of philanthropy right now. You may have discussed what happened at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
No, we didn't discuss that.
Okay, so they had a DEI initiative at the within their journalism program there. They were trying to increase students of color and engaging them with journalism, documentary filmmaking, so on and so forth. And there was a federal complaint lodged by Stephen Miller against that program. I really need to try to follow up, but when I heard Francisco bring up Generation Z, I would, I would love to check in with those students there that are impacted at the university.
The same Stephen Miller who was with the Trump.
Yes, the very same. So, in terms of philanthropy, when we saw what happened to the Fearless Fund, which is a Black woman-led organization based here in Atlanta, they were sued by I can't remember the gentleman's name that sued the Fearless Fund, but the same gentleman who was involved with the case involving Harvard. Philanthropy responded by going to their lawyers and asking to kind of buttress some of the programs that we see that philanthropy supports. And it was interesting to watch that it was the same time that this stuff was happening over at Texas A&M, around that same period of time, with the journalism professor in the journalism school at Texas A&M. And so they were trying to buttress to protect themselves against similar lawsuits. And so I find it interesting, launching the only 2 journalism funds that target people of color. When I launched the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund, that was one of the points of contention. We had to make sure that we inserted legal language so that it wasn't just people of color that we supported. We had to insert the word prioritize at the insistence of our lawyers. And so when I launched the Pivot Fund, we did the exact same thing. We said we don't say we serve only news outlets led by and serving communities of color. We say we prioritize those organizations in order to protect ourselves legally. And now I'm worried about even that with this assault against DEI. I'm not sure that even that is enough, and that we're going to have to take further steps to protect ourselves. And so so this conversation has me thinking a lot. It also a lot of us who accept grant dollars are now being confronted by, well, we don't want to just specify people of color or Black-led media or Hispanic-led media. I mean, we are actually having some of those conversations with funders. And so, yes, right now I'm talking to other philanthropic organizations, other so-called regranters or intermediaries to figure out how they are handling this. Because it's not just the one or two of us in the journalism space, funding space that are being confronted with this. I'm sure it's other organizations that are committed to racial equity as well. So anyway, thank you for this conversation, Richard.
Thank you, Tracy. Glad, and congratulations on all of your recent honors and expansion of your business.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, all right. All right, that brings us to an end. We ran a little over, but I think it was worth it.
Actually, I didn't get to introduce
Oh, I'm sorry, Cynthia. I thought when you asked. Go ahead. Briefly, though.
My name is
I think you're
My name is Cynthia Robbins. I don't have sound on though, so we have to use yours.
okay. We heard you though.
We can hear you, Cynthia.
Done a lot of civil rights litigation and advocacy, and I am really, first of all, I want to congratulate you, Richard, and everybody in journalism for an extraordinary program, a very provocative one. And we're dealing with a very, very challenging situation right now that this chilling effect is absolutely intended. There is a total connection between what's happening with voter suppression, with anti-DEI, anti-CRT, anti-African American history, because most of it isn't critical race theory. But the reactionary side has focused in on these terms that people don't even really understand, and then they demonize them. Woke, DEI, all of these different thoughts. And then people get scared about doing the right thing. So I thank you all who are working so hard to make a space for us to do the things that we know work. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and justice. Oftentimes J is included, because really at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. So thank you, Richard, for organizing this. And it's good to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Thanks everybody for being. We're getting feedback. Okay. All right. Thanks everybody for being here. We I think we got a lot out of this, and I hope we have got some marching orders for what we can do to counter this trend. And we will be printing out the chat comments to share with everybody who was on the call. And we want to post this also on YouTube for those who were not here or those who want to refresh their memories on things that were said. So thank you all for being here. Have a good rest of the evening, and hope to see you all next month when we have another topic. Good night, everybody.
Hey, Richard.
Rod, I didn't even see you just now.
He just came in.
Oh,
I just
wonder. All right, you can watch the recording.
Okay.
And that's what we have it.
Sorry, I had to take my dog to a math thing.
We're getting feedback.
Why is that?
I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, glad you're here. You can watch the recording and hopefully get some ideas.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Good night, Rob.